Duff Crerar was born and raised south of Ottawa. He was a part-time teacher at Queen's University in the 80s while completing his PhD and Bachelor of Education. In 1990, he began teaching full-time at Grande Prairie Regional College, retiring just this year. His interest in the role and personal stories of military chaplains has made him an expert on the subject. He has written a book, Padres in No Man's Land, Canadian Chaplains in the Great War. The war to end all wars, Duff, certainly was not that. So much tragedy and loss there. What directed your interest to not just war, but chaplains in the war?
Well, I was looking for a PhD topic, and I was interested in morale. And I was at the University of Western Ontario at the time, and it was a fall day, and I was walking across the grass from social sciences to married students, and it was like a concrete thought as real as a brick popped into my head. Why not chaplains? And I thought, you're right, I checked around, and no one had done it. I went to Ottawa, and the National Archives people said, nope, no one's done it, and there's 65 feet of paper from World War I Canadian chaplains that no one's ever examined.
65 feet?
Linear feet, lined up end to end, side by side, all the way down, yeah. So it was a long set of years of research to get through it all and piece it all together, because most of it was letters. And then a pattern began to emerge that was, to me, a central theme in understanding how our Christian churches have tried to shape Canada's life. And also, it became very important to me personally as I went through a series of challenges and real emotionally grinding years, and it became a source of inspiration for me as well.
Indeed. You say long, dark nights of the soul.
Oh, yes.
And waiting on God in prayer, understanding the silences of God, and keeping faith through hard, dry times.
Yeah.
Ministered in all of that.
Yeah.
To these chaplains, though dead.
Oh, they said some very important things in their time, and they're examples. And there were times when I was really depressed for various reasons. And I was sitting there and I wasn't feeling the presence of God. And every day I'm working on these guys who are in the middle of the trenches, because our chaplains in World War I were in the trenches, and realizing that in some ways if they could get through what they did, if they could persevere in keeping faith and doing their job, if they could gather strength from each other and from the men they're ministering to, and some of them died, and some of them did lose their emotional and intellectual balance for the rest of their life. We would call it PTSD. In those days it was shell shock.
Right.
But to do what they did, they could get up every morning and try to do what they were supposed to do, and that's what I did until I got better.
Amazing.
Yeah, and some of their prayers, you're working at 3 in the morning on a chapter that's not going well, and everyone upstairs has gone to bed, my wife and the kids, and I'm tapping away with the CBC midnight radio on, and I'm getting to a point where somebody says, the soldier could save others, but they could not save themselves. And the chaplain is saying it's like Jesus, who could save others, but could not save himself. And I'm thinking, how can I stop writing about these people? How can I give up on this? And it helped me.
Well, I've had a lot of interest in this. Wrote about this in our Compass magazine several years ago. This is my adopted grandpa, originally from Liverpool, who lied about his age, and at 18 was in the Canadian Army and fought at Vimy Ridge. Yep. I'm just going to read a portion of what he wrote in letters. How precious these men wrote letters, and this is our history. This is your research. He says, on that fateful morning, it was raining, then snowing, water everywhere, and then the big attack. All our guns opened up, and away we went. Between snow and rain, mud and big shell holes, we finally made our objective. But what a cost in young lives. I looked above and went on my knees to thank my protector, capital P.
Yeah. One of the Psalms that soldiers love is Psalm 91. And other Psalms of protection and providence. One of their favorite hymns is Abide With Me. Still is in the British Army today.
Psalm 91, he will give his angels charge
over thee. Exactly.
To keep you in all your ways.
Exactly. And so for them, this real sense of dependence and gratitude, a lot of gratitude. For some, of course, that fades when you come home. But the chaplains saw so much of that they said, this must have a value for Canada after the war. so many men had managed to do their duty by giving their lives in faith and in fear to some degree, that surely this will revive Canada after the war. We just have to capture that faith in the trenches and bring it home and turn it loose in Canadian life, in the churches and the society. The sad thing was, of course, that when they got home, they discovered that the cause had evaporated, the war had been won, and then one little by little things began to divide them within each other, from each other, strikes, labor disputes, and I think a general fear among many church leaders that these men have been radicalized as Christians and might overthrow the church order, might say we have to...
You mean they might be too enthusiastic?
Well, exactly, and become impatient with some of the standards by which churches did church in the years before the war. A lot of them came back and said, you know, I had officers who sat down and we shared our last can of corned beef together. That doesn't seem to happen in my church down in downtown Toronto, where the rich sit in one place and we all sit in the rest, and there's wealth involved and certain people make all the decisions, and we have a lot of people who come back, kind of like some missionaries come back from the field, and they're disoriented by the wealth and affluence. And as the
Reverse
soldiers
culture
said,
shock.
complacency. So the chaplains felt that too, by the way. They came back and discovered that all the recommendations for the churches were one by one dismissed as too radical. And church authorities occasionally said, look, you guys had a wonderful adventure over there, but get over it. Now it's time to go back to doing church the right way.
Too dramatic.
Very hard. Oh, the 20s and 30s were very hard for a lot of chaplains.
Now, they weren't supposed to fight.
No, chaplains were in fact, after the Geneva Convention, legally, in the law of armed combat, neutral. No weapons. We had a couple chaplains who, in desperate situations, have picked up a weapon. Historically, it's very hard. All the chaplains I know from Canada in either war who did use a weapon, even in a tangential way, like just to give covering fire, found it very hard to go back to ministry after the war. And some of our bravest chaplains, one or two in each war, have picked up a weapon to help. Usually when there's a position's been overrun, fight or flight, and suddenly they're there with their men and one's wielding a rifle butt and so on. So those things did happen, but those chaplains came back and said, there might be blood on my hands, I can't minister anymore.
I was surprised to read too, and I shouldn't have been surprised, but they were told not to diminish the fighting spirit in the troops.
Well, of course. During World War I, this is the interesting thing. In World War I, the cause was clear because almost everyone on all the sides believed that the kingdom of God had to be brought on earth by the work of the church, and that missions around the world were going to establish this. The darkness would turn to the dawning and the dawning to noonday bright because of the church. And then Christ's great kingdom would come on earth, the kingdom of love and light. I sang it for years, not knowing that its theology was post-millennial when it was written, of course, and the idea that most evangelicals had. And most of these chaplains had an evangelical conversion experience. What they didn't see was, of course, that the idea of establishing the kingdom of God on earth by the work of the church was actually not going to work out that way. And during the war, many of them again and again and again insist that the work they're doing is bringing the power of faith into the trenches so the soldiers can come back and join with them in reforming society at home.
No atheists in foxholes.
Not many.
Did you know you had a relative in this service before you started your research?
Well, actually, I've always known that my grandfather was in the trenches.
As a chaplain?
No, as a soldier, actually.
Oh, he was a soldier.
Yeah, he was,
Okay.
yeah. He signed up as a kid from school and jumped into the trenches and ended up, by process of elimination, one unit after another being eliminated, ended up in the 13th Battalion Black Watch. And it was there that his chaplain, Edward Graham, connected with him about commitment to Jesus.
Beautiful.
So the family has always had this tradition that Grandpa became a Christian in the trenches, having experienced the Psalm, and then having been wounded 2 days before the Battle of Vimy Ridge. So he missed the battle because he'd been wounded, but came back and his battalion had been wiped out. So he moved on to another battalion within the Black Watch, from the 73rd to the 13th, and finished the war there. Came back as like many veterans, I think, not wanting to wear his heart on his sleeve. So even more modestly as a Presbyterian, you don't wear your heart on your sleeve. But nevertheless, a Christian committed to the idea of living a Christian life. But at the same time, a bit disillusioned with how church was done when he got home.
Interesting. Oh, so much more we'd love to know. But we have some great pictures. Tell us who we're seeing as we go to those now.
Right. Well, this is Canon Scott off by himself towards the front. Probably Canada's most famous chaplain. He was 56 when he went overseas.
Now, is this on the left? Yep.
Far left,
Far
that's
left.
right. He's got the darker uniform. He would put a private's uniform on to go to the front. And he was one of the ones who broke British regulations, which stipulated that you couldn't go to the front. And consistently he did this. He was
right in harm's way.
Oh, he was, yes. And he ended up being very badly wounded at the end of the war. But in the process, there's my grandfather.
Grandfather now on the left.
Far left, that's little Duff Crerar.
How old is he?
Oh, he's 18, I think, there.
Oh, he doesn't even look that
His
old.
first duty was guarding the ruins of the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, which burned down on New Year's Day in 1916 or 17. This is a classic funeral. We used to play a game called Spot the Padre in this one because he looks like all the other people there, but he's got a little white prayer book in his hand. And they're burying an officer. It's not snow, it's chalk. Even today you can find the trenches on the Somme because of the chalk thrown up when they were digging into the subsoil for the trenches and the graves. And then W.H. Davis. Davis was an amazing chaplain, Anglican from Edmonton. He went out into no man's land during the Battle of Passchendaele and negotiated a truce between the Germans and the Canadians so that the wounded could be brought off the field. And then he was killed in 1918 by shell fire. And there's three of our most famous chaplains. Graham on the far right with the cane, my grandfather's chaplain, Methodist. Canon Scott in his full dress uniform in the middle. And Alec Gordon, son of the principal of Queen's University, who was the senior chaplain of the 4th Division, MCDSO. These are people who went out beyond the wire, risked their lives, and were wounded in the process. We had 4 chaplains killed in World War I.
Those men are at Buckingham Palace?
Yes, getting their
in that
decorations. That's right.
Very
They've all got a cane or a crutch in the picture somewhere.
I'd like to keep you around for quite a while here because you just loaded. I showed this picture to you.
Yes.
This is World War II. This is my dad
Yep.
with the 1st Canadian Airborne. You know what happened to his chaplain.
Well, on the Normandy jump, Padre Harris jumped with everyone else, but his chute became entangled with another paratrooper. They jumped at night, the chutes got tangled up. And so his last words were, "Don't panic," because the guy below him was struggling with the chute tangled up. They both hit together, and he hit too hard. He died the night of Normandy, D-Day operation. The second chaplain to the unit lasted much longer. He jumped at the Rhineland, and Doug Candy went with the unit all the way through to Frankfurt and finished the war with them. But there were 11 chaplains killed in World War II.
Maybe the most important statement you make, and this is for all of us, for all of history. You say we should never ignore the Christian experience of 2,000 years of belief, testimony, and mission.
Exactly. I think, one of my life verses is the idea that the Christian brings out of his treasure house treasures old and new. And I think that's where the experience of 2,000 years of Christian life, witness, testimony, struggle, disagreements, all these things have generated a huge storehouse of experience that we can learn from. And inspiration, as I found in those long, dark nights when I thought, am I ever going to finish this thesis? Am I ever going to graduate? Am I ever going to feel happy again? And I look at this stuff and I have this sense inside me, as strong as like a stone dropping into my brain. If they can do it, you can too, which I sure came from God.
Well, thank you for being a teacher for us all today and for compiling, well, we dare not call it a textbook, but really Padres in No Man's Land, Canadian chaplains in the Great War.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. It's been an honor.